The HR director slid a folder across her desk and told me I was terminated, effective immediately for operating an unauthorized outside consulting business on company time. I didn't look at the folder right away. I looked at my brother, standing just inside the doorway with his arms crossed, and that slow, satisfied smile he'd been perfecting since we were kids. He expected me to fall apart. I didn't. My name is Rowan. I'm 29 years old, and for the past 5 years I worked as a senior patent analyst at Halcyon BioSciences, one of the largest pharmaceutical development firms in Boston. I had built their entire IP compliance infrastructure from the ground up. Every patent filing, every licensing agreement, every FDA submission that kept them legally protected through 3 rounds of federal review, that was my work, my nights, my weekends, my absolute refusal to let anything slip through the cracks. And my brother, who had just been appointed Director of Innovation 2 months earlier, knew all of this, because I had spent years quietly cleaning up the messes he left on his way up. The HR director's name was Lori. She was a precise woman who wore her authority like armor and had clearly prepared for a fight. She had printed internet activity logs, flagged VPN connections, and timestamped data transfers she couldn't actually read but had decided were suspicious. She assumed I was running some freelance consulting side hustle on company time. She was wrong, but I wasn't going to correct her. My brother had fed her exactly enough information to justify the termination. I could see the shape of it clearly. The way he had positioned himself in the doorway instead of sitting down, the way Lori's paperwork stopped just short of anything that would require a real investigation. This wasn't about policy. This was about my budget line. He had been trying for weeks to bring in his old college roommate, a guy whose only professional qualification was that he'd once organized a corporate retreat in Scottsdale. The salary I was earning was exactly what he needed to make that hire look reasonable on paper. He also needed a scapegoat. The FDA had scheduled a preliminary compliance review of Halcyon's patent submissions for the following Thursday. My brother had been signing off on filings he didn't understand for 2 months. He needed someone to blame when the cracks started showing, and he needed that person gone before the reviewers arrived. I opened the termination folder, read the last page, and signed my name. Lori blinked like she'd been expecting me to throw the pen across the room. My brother's smile tightened at the edges. He'd wanted tears. He'd wanted me to beg. I smoothed the front of my jacket, stood up, and looked directly at him. "You're right," I said. "I really should be focused on one thing." He let out a short laugh. He thought I was conceding. He had no idea that in less than 48 hours, he would be standing in a boardroom desperately trying to reach the woman he'd just walked out the door. 2 security guards I recognized from the lobby walked me to the elevator. I'd helped one of them navigate an FMLA paperwork issue the year before. He stared straight ahead the whole ride down, and I didn't hold it against him. The building felt different on the way out. Smaller, somehow, like it had already stopped belonging to me. I walked through the lobby, through the revolving doors, and into the cold October air on Boylston Street. My brother caught up with me in the parking garage. I heard him before I saw him, dress shoes slapping wet concrete, moving faster than a man who'd just won something should need to. I'd already unlocked my car by the time he reached me. He set my desk box on the trunk, not gently. "I need the USPTO filing passwords," he said, his voice dropping low. "No performance now, no audience. The patent portal locked me out the second HR deactivated your employee access. Write them down and we'll call this even." I looked at him. The thing about my brother is that he had spent our entire lives believing charm was a substitute for competence. Our parents had always agreed with him. He was the one who got the car for his 16th birthday while I got a card with $40 in it. He was the one they paid tuition for while I worked 2 campus jobs and took out loans I spent years paying down. He was the one they called brilliant, promising, destined. And he had learned early that those words came free as long as someone in the background was quietly doing the actual work. That someone had been me for longer than I'd ever admitted out loud. "Those patent portal credentials aren't company property," I said. "The filing system was migrated to a third-party IP management platform last month under the new FDA compliance mandate. I was the authorized account holder. When Lori deactivated my employee profile, she ended my authorization. But the account itself belongs to the platform vendor, not Halcyon. You'll need to contact them directly and go through a full reauthorization process. He stared at me. Which, I added, takes about 3 weeks minimum. The FDA review is Thursday. His jaw tightened the way it always did when he realized he had outmaneuvered himself. You did this on purpose, he said. You fired me, I said. I didn't do anything. I put my desk box in the back seat and got in my car. He was still standing in the garage when I pulled out. I drove for a while without a destination. The Charles River was gray and flat under an overcast sky. I found a parking spot near the esplanade and sat with the engine off, listening to the quiet. My hands were steady. I had expected to feel more grief, maybe, or the specific burn of betrayal I'd felt every other time my family had chosen him over me. Instead, I felt something closer to clarity, like a room after a window's been opened. I reached into the back seat and pulled out my personal laptop. It wasn't the standard issue machine Halcyon had given me. It was a custom-built device I'd assembled over the course of 6 months. A matte black chassis, solid-state encrypted storage, and a proprietary operating system that left no recoverable footprint. It cost more than my first car. It was worth every cent. The biometric scanner confirmed my thumbprint. The camera completed the facial verification. The screen opened directly into the administrative dashboard of Bellwether IP Group. That was the secret my brother thought was a freelance side hustle. 4 years ago, I had started noticing something. Pharmaceutical companies were hemorrhaging money not because they lacked innovation, but because their IP teams didn't understand their own patent portfolios. Licensing agreements were written too narrowly. Prosecution strategies missed obvious extension opportunities. I had watched Halcyon nearly lose a blockbuster compound to a competitor because no one had filed a method of use continuation on time. I had fixed it quietly on my own at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I fixed it and went home and no one ever knew. So I built Bellwether. I structured it under a blind trust. I kept my identity out of every public document. The managing partner, as far as anyone in the industry knew, was a former Georgetown IP law professor who had consulted for 3 different biotech startups. He was real, he was brilliant, and he had agreed from the beginning that the firm's actual founder preferred to remain anonymous. To my parents and my brother, I was just Rowan, the one who had never gotten serious about her career, the one who spent too much time staring at a laptop screen. To the pharmaceutical industry, I was the reclusive architect of the most sophisticated patent strategy firm on the East Coast. Bellwether currently managed IP strategy for 7 mid-sized pharmaceutical companies. Combined, those portfolio represented nearly $4 billion in active licensing agreements. I opened my encrypted inbox. The priority alert was red. The message was from Halcyon CEO direct. I read it twice before I let myself feel anything. Dear Managing Partner, Bellwether IP Group. We are writing under urgent circumstances. Halcyon BioSciences is facing a preliminary FDA patent compliance review this Thursday. Our internal IP team has identified critical gaps in our prosecution documentation that require immediate expert intervention. We have been advised by outside counsel that Bellwether's methodology is the only approach that could realistically address our exposure in the available time frame. We are prepared to authorize an emergency engagement at any rate your firm determines appropriate. Please respond at your earliest opportunity. The situation is time-sensitive in a way I cannot overstate. He didn't know he was writing to me. The company that had just escorted me out of the building with a security guard on each arm was, 40 minutes later, begging the firm I owned to save them from a crisis that existed because my brother had been signing documents he didn't understand. I closed the inbox without responding. Let them sit with it. Desperation is a better negotiating condition than urgency. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. Family dinner tonight, Beacon Hill Grill, 7 p.m. Your father reserved the private room. Come ready to have a real conversation about what happened today. She had already heard my brother's version. I knew exactly what that version sounded like. He would have called her the moment the security guards started walking me to the elevator. He would have made himself sound reluctant, responsible, deeply pained by the necessity of it. She would have believed every word before he finished the first sentence. She always did. I typed back, I'll be there. Then I drove home. My apartment was in Cambridge. A converted loft on the third floor of a building the rest of my family believed was that little studio I rented because I'd never gotten serious about my career. They had never been inside it. The floor-to-ceiling windows faced the river. The kitchen had a 12-foot island. I had purchased it outright in cash 14 months ago. I had let my parents assume I was still renting something modest because their contempt had always been the best privacy I had. I showered. I pulled on a charcoal blazer and dark pants. I checked the bellwether monitoring dashboard one more time before I left. Halcyon's USPTO filings were already showing warning flags. Without my background maintenance on the patent portal, the automated continuation tracking, the prosecution deadline management I had been running quietly from my desk for 2 years, the system was beginning to surface the structural neglect my brother had papered over with his signature. I turned off the lights and went to dinner. The Beacon Hill Grill was the kind of place my father chose when he wanted people to notice him. White tablecloths, low lighting, a wine list that started at $80 a bottle and went somewhere my brother would order without looking at the right column. The hostess led me to the private room and I heard my mother's laughter through the door before I reached it. They were already 2 glasses in. My brother had changed jackets. He looked restored, polished, the parking garage version of himself safely buried. My father raised his glass in a small toast that wasn't directed at me. He made a hard call, my father said before I'd even unfolded my napkin. Leadership isn't about being liked, it's about protecting the organization. My mother nodded. He could have handled it quietly, Rowan, he gave you every chance. My brother leaned forward. Before the food comes, I need those portal credentials. IT confirmed what you said about the third-party platform, but they also said you can initiate a transfer of account authority by submitting a written release directly to the vendor. Just sign the form and this is over. I'm not signing anything tonight, I said. My father's expression hardened, and then dinner proceeded the way these things always did. My father delivered a prepared speech about loyalty and family reputation. My mother talked around and over things, framing my brother's failure as my obstruction and his entitlement as reasonable expectation. My brother sat back and let them do the work, only leaning in when he wanted to add pressure. I ate what was put in front of me. I listened, I didn't argue. Then my phone vibrated with the specific pattern I had configured for one kind of alert. My banking app. A home equity line of credit had been drawn against my name. The amount was $280,000. The application had used my social security number, my Cambridge address, the address I had told no one at this table, and my FICO score of 814 as the primary qualification for approval. The funds had been routed to a joint account I had nearly forgotten existed. An account my parents had opened for me when I turned 18, an account they were still co-signatories on. I kept my face completely still. My brother had no credit left. He'd burned through 2 personal loans and a business line over the past few years. My parents knew his credit was gone. They also knew that without a cash infusion before Thursday's FDA review, the forensic accounting that came with a compliance failure would expose the unauthorized budget transfers he'd been running through Innovation's discretionary accounts. So they had used my information, likely pulled my Cambridge address from public voter registration records, and drawn against my identity without asking, without warning, while I sat across a white tablecloth from them eating the dinner they'd invited me to as a distraction. I set my phone face down. I picked up my water glass and finished it slowly. The check arrived. My father pulled the leather folder toward himself, looked at the total and slid it across the table to me without a word. You'll take care of this, he said, not a question. Consider it a lesson, my brother added, about consequences. I opened my wallet. I counted out $23, the exact cost of my sparkling water and the side salad I'd eaten, and placed the bills on top of the folder. That covers mine, I said. The table went quiet. My banking app flagged an unauthorized credit inquiry about 40 minutes ago, I said, keeping my voice low and even. A $280,000 HELOC drawn against my social security number routed to the joint account you two still have access to. That transaction is going to be reversed tonight. And I'm filing a fraud report with all 3 credit bureaus first thing tomorrow morning. The private room at the Beacon Hill Grill had a certain kind of hush that nice restaurants cultivate deliberately. In that moment, the hush turned into something else entirely. "We were going to tell you," my father said finally. "Tomorrow," my mother added. "Just to bridge the gap," my brother said. "Until after the review, we would have paid it back." I stood up and put on my coat. "You didn't ask me," I said. "You didn't even consider asking me. You used my information because you assumed I wouldn't find out in time, or that if I did, you could talk me back into line before it mattered. That's not a bridge. That's a theft." I left them with the bill. Back in Cambridge, I initiated a full credit freeze through all 3 bureaus: TransUnion, Experian. The process took 11 minutes. The HELOC transaction still pending in the clearing system was automatically flagged for recall. The originating bank would freeze the application and open a fraud investigation. The $280,000 that was supposed to cover my brother's deficit would never arrive. I watched the bellwether dashboard until past midnight. By morning, Halcyon's patent portal showed 3 escalating system warnings. My brother had attempted to log into the filing management system 6 times using incorrect credentials. Each failed attempt generated a new lockout notification. He was running out of time and completely out of options. 17 missed calls between my brother and my parents sat on my phone. I forwarded them all to voicemail. Then I dressed, picked up my briefcase, and drove into the city. Bellwether's physical office occupied half a floor in a Seaport District building. Most people walked past without registering. I had designed it that way deliberately. My attorney met me at the elevator with a tablet and the expression she wore when something was proceeding exactly as planned. "Halcyon sent 4 more messages through the engagement portal overnight," she said, following me down the corridor. "The CEO escalated to the board chair by 6 this morning. They've authorized an emergency licensing agreement at whatever fee we name." "What's the FDA's status?" "On schedule for Thursday. A preliminary document request went to Halcyon yesterday afternoon. Their response window is 48 hours. I sat down at my desk. "We're not selling them a license," I said. She nodded slowly. "How do you want to respond?" "Request a board-level meeting. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., their offices. The CEO, the CFO, General Counsel, the HR Director, and the Director of Innovation must all be present, no substitutions." She considered this for a moment. "He won't know it's you until you walk through the door." "That's correct." She allowed herself a small smile and went to draft the communication. The next morning, I walked into Halcyon's lobby for the first time as something other than an employee. My attorney walked on my right. The reception team, who would have waved me through with a badge scan 48 hours ago, now stood at formal attention as she presented our credentials. The elevator opened onto the executive floor. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see the board members arranged around the table, tight-faced, the particular posture of people who haven't slept because something they were certain about has started falling apart. My brother sat near the head of the table. He looked like he'd spent the night rehearsing. He was the only person in the room who still appeared confident. That confidence lasted until I opened the door. He stood up involuntarily, like his body made the decision before his brain caught up. The word that came out of his mouth wasn't a sentence. It was just my name, strangled and small. My attorney walked to the center of the table and placed a bound document in front of the CEO. "I'd like to introduce the founder and managing principal of Bellwether IP Group," she said. I took the chair at the far end and set my laptop on the table. "I'll be brief," I said, "because I know your time is limited." I walked them through it without raising my voice. The patent portal architecture, built on my personal methodology, maintained through my personal access, now locked behind a vendor reauthorization process that required weeks, not hours. The documentation gaps that had accumulated under my brother's approval signatures over the past 2 months. The specific FDA submission requirements that were currently unmet and could not be remediated without someone who understood the prosecution history in precise detail. And then I pulled up his emails. After Halcyon's CEO had given my brother his ultimatum, my brother had reached out to the Bellwether engagement portal himself. The first message was professional enough. By the third, he was proposing that Bellwether accept a payment routed through a vendor account he described as outside normal procurement visibility, in exchange for softening the compliance narrative presented to the FDA. By the fifth, he had named a specific offshore account, one that had appeared in connection with his personal financial history before, and offered to classify the payment as an emergency technology expense moved through a discretionary reserve account he personally controlled. He had put it in writing. He had sent it to me. The board read his messages on the conference room screen in complete silence. "Rowan," my brother said, his voice had lost all of its shape. "Please, I'll resign. I'll give everything back, just don't." "The FDA compliance team is already in the building," my attorney said quietly. "They arrived 8 minutes ago." I closed my laptop. Bellwether is formally declining Halcyon's licensing request due to an unresolved breach of professional ethics involving the Director of Innovation, I said. "Our legal team will cooperate fully with the federal review. We wish you well in resolving this." I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked out. My brother was terminated before the close of business that day. The FDA's preliminary review flagged 17 documentation deficiencies across his department's filings. The forensic audit that followed uncovered $340,000 in redirected discretionary funds spread across 3 fiscal quarters, moved in amounts small enough that no single transfer had triggered automatic review. He had counted on my maintenance work to hide the holes in the compliance record. Without that cover, the holes were obvious to anyone who looked. He was charged with wire fraud and misappropriation of company funds. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. Every contact he had ever cultivated over client dinners and golf outings stopped returning his messages within the week. He had spent years building a network out of performance and credit he hadn't earned, and performance and credit were exactly what he no longer had. My parents faced their own reckoning more slowly, the way financial consequences usually arrive, not all at once, but in a series of letters that grow increasingly official in tone. The bank recalled the HELOC, the fraud investigation froze the joint account, and subsequently, the home equity line they had been using as a buffer for years. Without that liquidity, and with legal fees accumulating behind it, the math on their house stopped working. They listed it in February. By spring, it had sold, and they were renting something smaller in a suburb my mother had always described with gentle disdain when other people lived there. I didn't feel triumphant about any of it. I felt tired, and then after a while I felt something I hadn't expected. Free, not victorious, not vindicated, just free, in the specific way you feel free when you finally stop waiting for people to be different than they are. The calls and texts from my family slowed and eventually stopped. I didn't change my number. I just stopped responding, and they eventually seemed to understand that the silence wasn't a strategy. It was the simple result of having nothing left to negotiate. They had tried to use me as raw material for someone else's survival. When I declined to be used that way, there wasn't much left to say between us. Bellwether took on 2 new pharmaceutical clients in the months that followed, referred by attorneys who had heard about our role in the Halcyon situation. I still work out of the Seaport office most mornings. I still read through patent prosecution files late at night, not because I have to anymore, but because the work is genuinely interesting and I am finally doing it entirely on my own terms. Someone asked me recently, at dinner with people I actually chose to be around, what I had learned from everything that happened. I thought about it for a real moment before I answered. What I learned is that the people who underestimate you are not usually wrong about what you're capable of. They're wrong about what you'll do with it. They think your patience is fear. They think your silence means you've accepted the terms they've set. They don't understand that some of us are just waiting until we're ready. I was fired for running a second business on company time, and they were absolutely right that I was. The part they missed was that the business was worth more than the company, and that the only person standing between them and a federal review had just signed her name on their termination paperwork and walked, calm and unhurried, out into the morning.